Chapter 12 and 13 deal with organizational structure and professional practice. You also have a video specific to professional practice models, but I kind of want to focus more a little bit on organizational structure so that you understand some of those key definitions and some of the different leadership or managerial theories that go behind how organization structure would actually be set up. So in every organization, you're going to see both a structure that lists the chain of command, who reports to who. Some of these models are going to be very deep, others more flat, and I'll show you some examples of that. Some may be systems that have multiple organizations all connected to a larger system. And then in addition to all these formal reporting structures, you also have like an organizational social structure where people interact for other varieties of things that go on in organizations that bring people together in sort of informal structures. So there's some key theories of how organizations are set up as social systems. The bureaucratic theory, the scientific management school, the classic management theory, human relations school, and the open systems theory. And I'm going to just give you some brief rundowns on each of these. The bureaucratic theory was set up by theorist Max Weber, and he viewed bureaucracy as a social leveling mechanism that sometimes should be founded on impartial and yet merit-based selection of people. However, that you can see that he felt that bureaucracies often emphasize purely economic results at the expense of important social values. And so, that's why you hear the term bureaucracy these days, and people think of that as a very negative connotation because it's more about kind of a capitalist thought than a social thought on people's values. And then there was the scientific management school, and this was an act or a type of thought that came about in terms of ways to improve labor relations and to improve the low industrial standards. And so this came about more from an idea that you should have people at the bottom of the organization to kind of really help give input and feedback as to how the organization was set up or how it was designed. And the goal was to kind of enhance this more cooperative relationship between management and labor. And you saw several of these, the times when labor unions were big in our country coincide somewhat with that. The classic management theory is more of our autocratic, top-down approach. Key concepts in this type of theory in terms of how organizational structures were done. There's this differentiation of specializations, how work is coordinated, the idea of a scalar principle, and that everything should be centralized, from the top hierarchy down. And there was also the term span of control that kind of deals with the amount of personnel that optimally should be reporting to one person to be effective. Human relations school, this was another theoretical model that's based on the informal aspects of social structure. And so this was kind of founded in psychology and testing. And you may have heard of the Hawthorne experiments or the Hawthorne effect. And pretty much has said that if people were being watched and inspected, that they would do better work. And also from a positive standpoint, that if they were given more responsibility and in terms of job enlargement and job rotation, would help with some of this alienation that workers felt because of all the formal structures and work processes in an agency. The open system theory also kind of focused a lot on this more of a dynamic interaction and interdependence of the organization, not only internally but externally. So it's kind of like your big systems theory. And it said that effective performance is dependent on the fit between the structure and the multiple factors such as technology, size, and strategy, and where the agency is going. And so you would hear terms about this theory where people would say, is this ship the size that we can, and we have the resources to be able to turn it in a specific direction? Some of those kind of comments were based on the right that the organization would have a much better performance, not just overall, but within its structure itself, as long as all these factors were considered as how the structure was set up in the first place. There are some newer organizational theories, complexity theory, which deals a whole lot with adaptation and feedback loop, meaning that it's a very complex open system, and the more detail and information that we're getting back about how things are going, the better we're able to be flexible and move and change and grow for the future. And then network theory really deals with people having social capital, meaning that their ability for the organization to have a lot of success and them internally to have success in terms of their rank and where they are on the structure also has to do with both formal working relationships as well as informal working relationships. So key organizational design concepts, division and coordination of labor. Sometimes, the structure is set up by occupations, by task, by specialization. So if there's a very specialized group with experts, they might put them in one specific area to optimize work. So these are just ways to kind of figure out how to subdivide out work and then reporting structures, maybe by a specific division of work or a service line in a hospital. But sometimes creating some of these divisions breaks up a lot of the workflow. And nursing is a wonderful example of that, because we subdivide it down into service lines, often based on physician service work, but still there are many, many core responsibilities for nursing that are the same for every kind of nursing service. And so sometimes we aren't aware in the critical care unit what somebody does for something in oncology, and that's because of these divisions in by specialization or by nursing practice or service area. So there are some common programming devices to control work in healthcare. And so how do managers really go about controlling work? And that's done through standardization. And, y'all can probably think of some things that are in hospitals today that are standardized. Many policies set specific standards. We may have, like, for example, an MSDS book or electronic safety manual or something, and it's all the same. And so we know that every time somebody that hangs a bag of blood is doing that the same way and the same standard, irregardless of where it is that they are. So that's just one way to kind of control some of the specific things that occur in an organization using standardization. We also use organizational forms, and these are sometimes set up to coordinate the division of labor in terms of size and the degree of centralization and formalization. So as organizations grow, work units sometimes, because they get larger, are having to be subdivided into different categories, and so that there is this thing of span of control, so that there's not too many employees for one person to have to manage, and so this kind of coordination is measured pretty much by the degree of centralization and or formalization. So you hear this word called hierarchy, which really is just the structure of authority. You may say, well, why is that important to nursing? Well, legally, the structure in the hierarchy forms the way in which we legally have to report things. So when you think about organizational structure, it may be many years before you have a lot of input into a structure, but you have to work within it as a new graduate and for the early years of your life. So when concerns come up, when problems arise, you have a duty as a licensed nurse to report up this chain of command. So knowing what it is, how it looks, and kind of looking at it from the stance of, is there really too many people under one person? Is this very difficult, more so for someone to give the amount of oversight that's needed? To kind of analyze some of those structures and understanding what might be making the employees feel a certain way about how things are coordinated or overseen, you can kind of get the sense of that to a degree. There are 5 basic organizational forms or methods that you would go to kind of decide how do we want to structure this animal. Functional, which we've talked a little bit about. Programs or service lines, that's another one. Parallel, and I'll mention each one of these a little bit more detail. A modified program, and then a matrix. So when people are looking at an actual design on paper and you go to look at these, see if you can decide when you're going for job interviews, take time to look at their organizational chart and see if you can kind of tell which is which. So a functional form is one that kind of divides things out by work functions or by occupation. So, at the top end, you're going to have a senior leadership team. They're responsible for oversight, policies, efficiency, professional standards, and then, but down below them, if there are unique things to specific occupations, then they have each one of those occupational categories would have some oversight, whether that's a chief nursing officer, a pharmacy director, a dietary director, social services department head, or environmental services director. And then from that point, you would see more breakdown below those directors or VPs, whatever their titles might be. The benefits of the functional form is it reduces cost, usually has improved performance and higher quality. The problem is many times there's no crossover between these departmental functional categories, and so thus you see these silos, not very good working relationships sometimes between nursing and pharmacy is a good example. And because of them being in a different functional group, maybe sometimes we're even having fragmented care or duplicated care, which is also a problem. A program form is more common these days. And you see this more in larger organizations where the directorship may be under a program like medical and surgical services, and then under that division of services